This is my final project for Martin Luther King Jr. And I'm going to be talking about Martin Luther King, his charismatic leadership paired with his servant leadership and emotional intelligence that helped him to become one of the greatest leaders that fought against racism and oppression in America. Martin Luther King Jr., born Michael King Jr., January 5th, 1929, was an American Baptist minister and an activist who became the most visible spokesperson and leader in the American Civil Rights Movement of 1955 until his assassination in 1968. King advanced civil rights through nonviolence and civil disobedience, inspired by Christian beliefs and the nonviolent activism of Gandhi. He was the son of early civil rights activist and minister Martin Luther King Sr. King participated and led marches for black rights to vote, desegregation, labor rights, and other basic civil rights. King led the 1955 Montgomery bus boycott and later became the first president of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. On October 14, 1964, King won the Nobel Peace Prize for combating racial inequality through nonviolent resistance. In 1965, he helped organize two of the three Selma to Montgomery marches in his final years. He expanded his focus to include opposition towards poverty, capitalism, and the Vietnam War. So charismatic leadership is defined by a leader who uses his or her communication skills, persuasiveness, and charm to influence others. Charismatic leaders, given their ability to connect with people, have a deep level and especially valuable within organizations that are facing crisis or are struggling to move forward. Dr. Martin Luther King was a charismatic leader who used powerful oratory, an engaging personality, and unwavering commitment to positively change the lives of millions of people. The characteristics of a charismatic leader look a little bit different. However, there are many key characteristics that most charismatic leaders are. They're strong communicators, they're empathetic and relatable, they're confident, motivational, engaging, and charming. Servant leadership is a leadership philosophy in which the goal of the leader is to serve. A servant leader shares power, puts the needs of the people first, and helps people develop and perform as highly as possible. Instead of people working to serve the leader exists to serve the people. Martin Luther King served his people by also protesting, not just being the face of the movement, but also protesting with the people. He was on the ground with the people, and was not just the main man. He was someone who pushed the crown for the people as well. So, because of Martin Luther King's Christian background, which inspired most of his speeches, that may have inspired his ideas of servant leadership and his ideas of charismatic leadership. Also, he came from a Christian background and his father was a preacher. That also inspired how he spoke to people with a sense of strength, confidence, and spoke in a preaching manner. So servant leadership employs different techniques. With the traditional leadership approach, the leader encourages people to do their jobs, providing them with the guidance, direction, and motivation. Servant leadership occurs when the leader's main goal and responsibility is to provide service to their people. The servant leader focuses on the people that are directly below them. So someone who's a great example of servant leadership is Jesus Christ, which is one of the main figures of Christianity. Jesus used to wash his disciples' feet. Why did Jesus wash the feet of the disciples at the beginning of the last Passover? The profound meaning of the performance of washing foot service during the early commemoration of Jesus' death. In the 13th chapter of John, we find Jesus performing a simple act of washing with his disciples during his last few hours on earth. It reveals not only his true character, but the character he wants all believers to develop. Jesus' act of humility teaches so much in its critical life of a Christian that he commands all those to follow him to do the same. Jesus lived a life engaging people such a way that he served in such a way that their lives changed by his encounter with them. He was a servant because he dedicated his life to setting people free. He set them free by healing them, delivering them, and by teaching them. Moses is another great example of a Christian who was a servant leader as well, but we're going to get to that later. Martin Luther King believed in non-violent protesting. Martin Luther King did not find ways to protest that was oppressing people who were oppressing him, but instead he let people know what was going on. He went on ground, marched without being violent. There was so much rage with the black people at this time, so much rage within the people, for being segregated, for being treated less than. But still, these people of color went on site, went to the road to protest peacefully, for the equal rights of all colors of people. And so this was something that was a very big deal, and something that required emotional intelligence to do at the time, because sometimes people feel like um, it's self-defense if you're being oppressed and you fight back the oppressor. It's self-defense to fight back violently if you're being fought violently, or being systematically oppressed, to fight back with systematic oppression. But sometimes when you're emotionally intelligent enough to know that you're in a situation where you're outnumbered, you're in a situation where the people that have authority in the place that you're in have more power than you, have the ability to take more charge, and you're the minority. So in the case when you're the minority, you can't be violent to fight for your freedom. You have to fight peacefully to get out. So this ties in with the story of Moses. Moses withstood incredible opposition in his time as a leader. In his pastures, his family came against him, and Aaron and Miriam questioned if God had spoken through him. That question was put convincingly when God called Moses something fewer other people in all the scripture were called, his servant. No one in the Old Testament received the esteem title more than Moses. It's important to keep in mind that Moses only spoke in numbers, to beg God to have mercy on the very people who questioned his status and integrity. And a similar thing happened in Exodus when the people were led, abandoned their faith in God to make a golden calf that they had worshipped and sacrificed. The background is arguably even more irrelevant or irreverent towards Moses than the event with Moses and Miriam. The Israelites formed their plan because the people saw that Moses delayed coming down from the mountain and told Aaron, "Come, make us gods that shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up on the land, we do not know what has become of him." Moses stood up for the others and put his life on the line for them. In another example of powerful leadership, he received and accepted godly wisdom. It was clear that Moses exhibited many qualities of a servant leader, making him one of the most obvious candidates of servant leadership in the Bible. Martin Luther King's "I Have a Dream" speech was fighting for the equality of all people, not just his people. He had a dream that his 4 children would one day live in a nation where they were not judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. And he did not have this dream just for black people. It was for people of all color. For an America that was united and people could get free opportunities, live in a world of diversity, and not be fought against. So not only was this important to see that Martin Luther King was fighting for all people and he was a servant leader, but he was nonviolent in his strategic ways of speaking towards the people who had power. And this is also coincides with Moses asking the Pharaoh to let his people go. He did not fight the way that Pharaoh was fighting and enslave the people that he was trying to let go, the people that were trying to be set free. But he just kept going to Pharaoh, even though his heart was hardened, and asking Pharaoh to let his people go. The same way that Martin Luther King was asking people of color to be set free and let his people go. So Martin Luther King was emotionally intelligent enough to know that there were authorities and people watching him. It seemed as though his force and voice had so much power to influence people that people saw that what he was doing. He was being watched wherever he was going, and he knew this because he was seen as a threat. While all of this was going on, even before the day that he was assassinated, it was as though he knew what was going on and death threats were being sent to him. So these death threats led to Martin Luther King knowing the day before he was assassinated that it was one of his last speeches he would make. So that required emotional intelligence to see that he was on his last days on earth. So while the man who would assassinate him the next day was holed up in the new Reptile Motel, hundreds of people were flittering into the Mason Temple in Memphis, Tennessee, to hear Martin Luther King Jr. speak. Outside, the thunderstorm was raging. The people clustered in front of the church, shedding their shattered jackets as they stood in their seats. They waited. Martin Luther King was a half hour late, and pausing a moment as he stepped into the rostrum, he peered over a welter of microphones as the TV cameraman flooded him with the light. His face took a luminous sheen, but something seemed amiss. After he greeted the audience, he lauded for them braving the storm, coming to the rally, showing that they had the backbone to carry Memphis sanitation workers' strike. In the words following, King had nothing more to say about the storm. Yet he would say that the storm had something to say to him. Time and time again, wind gusted punched open two large window fans near the ceiling of the auditorium. The shutters clacked shut each time, startling King. Every time there was a bang, he would flinch. King looked hard, tired, and worn in rush, observed one minister. He had a sore throat, was sleep deprived, and by the end of the speech he would deliver that night, everyone in the Mason Temple would know another reason why he seemed out of sorts. There had been no time to prepare, and if he had tended to do so, King often spoke without notes. Even the stakes were extremely high. He was doing it again on this night, and he had an astonishing knack for speaking off the cuff. He seemingly had a photographic memory. He told his listeners out the hairline that the threat seriously was been on board. He guarded the plane that night and checked all the passenger bags for explosives. Upon his arrival to Memphis, King said he had heard yet more talk about death threats against him. He continuously, in a melancholy, self-reflective mood, saying that he was facing some difficult days ahead. But he said he had prepared for anything, no matter what might lay ahead, because he had been through the mountaintop. Recording. His words reflected a soul-searching as he contemplated the specter of death. He talked about many times before the fear of dying of a violent death, but it was unusual for King to dwell openly on the depth of despair, pondering his fear of death. His manner was typically lighthearted, self-assured, and unflappable. That night in Memphis, however, he seemed near panic, anxious that he might be the target of an assassin's bullet at any moment. So his last speech before Martin Luther King was assassinated, it was as if he knew what was going to happen before it happened. And so at the Mason Temple, when he gave his last speech, he was in distraught, and he knew what was coming before it came. All of this was all signs of emotional intelligence that led Martin Luther King as a leader. So all of these things that paired charismatic leadership, servant leadership, and emotional intelligence guided Martin Luther King and his leadership to be one of the greatest spokespersons for peace in America.